Hi, I'm Tim Stout. Do you know what will probably turn out to be the single greatest cause of death from the pandemic COVID-19 is causing? I believe that looking back, we will find that current governmental regulations which delay the use of new drugs will have resulted in more deaths than any other factor. This is why. Some new drugs were developed specifically to fight this pandemic. They were announced as ready for testing over 3 months ago, around the end of March. Assuming that they are as effective as it appears that they could be, by now they should have already been proven safe and effective. They should already be ramping up to mass production. The pandemic should be on its way out. We should not need to worry about going back to work. We could start to focus on getting the economy working again. This is not our situation today at all. It is now the end of June. Over 120,000 people have died since many of these drugs were announced. The most promising of them are still not available for even limited human testing. We needed these drugs months ago when they first became ready. They were specifically designed to fight the pandemic. However, 120,000 deaths later, all they're allowed to do is sit on the shelf. If this doesn't sicken you, I don't know what will. What is going on here? Laws which are designed to give the highest possible safety at the cost of lengthy, time-consuming procedures themselves become the highest cause of death during the emergency conditions of a pandemic. These laws need to be changed. Our very survival depends on it. Are you ready if a second pandemic were to suddenly appear? Under the current laws in effect, we would be no more prepared to fight a new one than we currently are for this one. A new protocol. This video is about a new drug approval protocol, a protocol which is designed to get new drugs designed to fight a pandemic into immediate use with reasonable safety. I believe that if these proposed new regulations had already been in effect at the beginning of this year, that the worst part of the pandemic would already be over and we would be well on our way towards getting back to normal. The highest priority. I believe that we have seen that pandemics pose the single greatest threat to the survival of our country. Therefore, making the changes we will talk about in this video represent the single most important issue facing you, your friends, and everyone else in the country. Unless you like wearing masks every time you go out in public. Unless you like not being able to see your friends when you want to. Unless you like watching the economy get tanked and jobs disappear. Unless you like these things, you need to understand the things we will be talking about in this video. You also need to consider whether there might be something you could do to help fix the problem. The big mismatch. The problem is a mismatch between the speed with which a pandemic can become entrenched and the legally required delays before new drugs can be used which were designed to fight against it. For instance, according to Worldometer.com, the first death in the United States from COVID-19 was reported in Washington State on February 29, 2020. A month later, on March 29th, there were 3,280 deaths. 2 months later, on April 29th, there were 62,823 deaths. 3 months later, there were 106,541 deaths. By contrast, current regulations have a built-in minimum 4-month delay from the time a new drug is announced and the first human trials can begin to take place. So, if a new drug had been ready to start testing on February 29th, then over 100,000 people could have died, yet there would still be at least another month to go before human testing could begin. With the new protocol I am proposing, these 4 months are wiped out. They're removed. And a pandemic, human trials could start within days of when they are announced as ready. 2 causes for the delay. So, if it is possible to just wipe out these delays, why are they there? It's a matter of perspective. It normally takes 5 to 10 years to get regulatory approval of a new drug. 4 months is irrelevant from this perspective. There are 2 separate causes for the delay. The first cause, animal trials. Under current law, a drug company can't even apply to the FDA for approval of a new drug until the drug has first been tested in animals for safety. This typically takes 2 or 3 months. However, people and animals are different. A drug may be safe in animals and still not be safe for people. Therefore, even after animal trials, the drug is initially given in very small doses in the first few people just to ensure it does not have serious problems. The amount is gradually increased until it should begin to show some kind of results. Eventually, the ideal dose is determined. The primary purpose of animal trials is to ensure the safety of the first 20 or so people to get the drug. Under normal conditions, 3 months to give this added protection are irrelevant for an approval process that could take 5 to 10 years. This is an unacceptable delay during a pandemic. In truth, there is very little risk in going directly to humans if small enough doses are given initially. So, more than 100,000 people can die in a pandemic just during animal trials. For what purpose? To slightly reduce the risk for the first 20 or so people taking the drug. This makes no sense. The second cause, time to process the application. If the animal tests go well, then the company files an application with the FDA. This starts an elaborate approval process where the company describes what it wants to do. The FDA analyzes the proposal to make sure everything is safe, and then an elaborate test scheme is worked out between the FDA and the company. This normally takes a very long time. It can even take years under normal conditions. However, the FDA has been cooperating with drug companies during the COVID-19 pandemic, and 2 to 3 months for approval seems to be more characteristic. Notice, we are not talking about approval to use the drug on a large scale in an effort to start fighting the pandemic. These negotiations are only for permission for a company to start small-scale, limited testing on the first people to get the drug. Full approval is still a long way off. These delays are troubling when one considers that new drugs are the only true weapons to fight the pandemic and how urgent it is to get them into immediate use. It is even more troubling when one thinks about how many more people are dying each hour during these negotiations. Suppose COVID-19 were as deadly as MERS. In 2012, there was an earlier coronavirus epidemic in the Middle East, which also caused severe pneumonia. It was called Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS. MERS is extremely severe and deadly. About 35% to 40% of the people getting it die. Fortunately, MERS was stamped out before it got firmly established. By contrast, 80% of the people that get COVID-19 are symptomless and do not even know they have it. When this is taken into account, it appears that only about 1% of those infected by COVID-19 actually die from it. If 35 times as many people were to die from COVID-19 as actually have died, there could have been well over 4 million people killed by the virus in our country already. At some points during April and May, there could have been 70,000 people dying each day. How could we even legally bury this many people? Yet, according to the law, we would still need to go through months of animal trials to slightly reduce risk for the first 20 people or so getting the drug. A drug company would still need to go through months of negotiating with the FDA on how to begin small-scale trials in people to ensure safety. Yet, while the FDA agent took a lunch break, 3,000 people would have died. Laws designed to protect life under normal conditions can result in overwhelming death in a pandemic. These laws are literally capable of destroying our country during a pandemic. They need to be changed. So, how do we implement blazing speed and reasonable safety at the same time? Maybe this is the way to go.
Here we are, riding in a minivan with nobody in the front seat, with pedestrians and cyclists and other vehicles out on a public road. It's a surreal experience.
This car was computer-driven, not human-driven. To drive a car in a public setting with pedestrians darting in and out requires very rapid, very sophisticated calculations. If a computer can make instant decisions while driving a car at speed inside a city, maybe it can make instant decisions in running a drug approval protocol under emergency conditions. The Stout Protocol. We need a new protocol which is designed to allow a new drug to start immediate testing on small numbers of people once certain minimal qualifications have been met. Animal trials are skipped unless the company itself wants them. I suggest creating a new government agency to implement the emergency protocol. Just as an army and a police force both have similar purposes in protecting the welfare of the public against bad guys, the Army represents an emergency situation and the police force represents a more normal situation. Despite their similarity, they have completely different mindsets and approaches. It has proven more effective to separate the two functions. I suggest the same situation is relevant to fighting a pandemic. For convenience, I refer to the new agency as CEER, Center for Emergency Epidemic Response. The protocol applies only for therapeutic treatments when an epidemic emergency has been declared by the President and ratified by the U.S. Senate. It is to be effective for a limited time, subject to extension if needed. Upon Senate ratification, new drugs become exempt from current regulations and subject to new ones to be administered by CEER. This exemption is not taken lightly. It is why Senate confirmation is required. Computer response is fast, effectively instantly. The ability to make complex analyses of data in an instant and post the results just as quickly is unique to computers. People cannot compete. In the new protocol, to avoid human interaction delays, a computer programmed with a predetermined procedural specification gives automatic control over the entire process for approval of new drugs. I believe the FDA has done an outstanding job of defining the phases and steps of new drug approval. In an emergency, the trick is to adapt these to allow immediate response to an application. This document is Part 312 of the FDA's investigational new drug application. However, there is a fundamental incompatibility between the urgency necessary to fight a pandemic and the meticulous approach appropriate for more normal conditions. It is this incompatibility which results in needless delays and needless deaths during a pandemic. A major element of my new protocol is resolving this incompatibility. The FDA document is designed to apply to everything from over-the-counter drugs where side effects are not generally tolerated to cancer drugs whose serious adverse reactions are barely compensated for by their effectiveness in killing cancer cells. The details of approval between these two kinds of drugs share very little in common. It takes lots of personal interaction between the FDA and a drug sponsor to determine how to test properly whatever kind of drug might show up next in the new drug applications. In a pandemic, thousands to tens of thousands of people can be dying each day as the steps here are slowly worked through. People will die while new drugs are being prepared to fight the pandemic. However, it is one thing for people to die while approval of a new drug is proceeding as rapidly as possible. It is a travesty when needed drugs available for testing sit unused on a shelf because of unnecessary bureaucratic delay. In terms of the cost of life during new drug approval, these deaths are wasted. By contrast, new drugs for the new protocol are specifically limited to therapeutic drugs for the specific disease causing the pandemic. Basically, everyone is dealing with the same issues. So instead of each company independently gradually working through essentially the same steps, the steps are predefined in the computer procedural specification. A company merely needs to check out the information on the public website to know what is expected of it. For us here, it is adequate to recognize that it is the specialization associated with focus on a single disease that allows the computer to control the approval process automatically. The overriding goal is to stop the pandemic. This in turn requires flexibility in the specification and quick response to make appropriate changes to it in the course of the pandemic. The entire protocol emphasizes speed and adapting to new situations as they appear. The computer gives the public complete open access to almost everything taking place in the trial. This is primarily to allow potential volunteers and their physicians a sound basis to understand the risks involved in participation. It is also a place where SEER can make available to the public a broad resource base about the pandemic. A drug sponsor, such as a drug company, university, or a research center, which has developed a new drug, fills out an application form and submits it to the computer. It tells what it wants to test and why it is qualified. If SEER approves the application, the company is allowed to start testing immediately. When a company submits its application, public parts of the application are immediately posted for anyone to read. The physicians of people who would like to participate in the trials submit an application to the computer, acknowledging the potential patient's availability. The physician chooses which drugs are appropriate for his patient. The computer automatically transmits the applications to the appropriate drug company. The company selects people it wants for the trials. The drug company then works directly with the personal physician for treatment. The heart of the protocol is a scorecard. After a physician treats his patient with the drug, he monitors the patient's response and reports it on a scorecard, which is then uploaded to the computer. The scorecard lists a number of issues, including the initial health status of the patient, the apparent effectiveness of the drug, any observed side effects, and whether the physician would recommend stopping the trial, continuing it on a limited basis, or increasing the number of people included in the trial. SEER will typically have a number of other issues to be reported as well. The computer calculates a new score immediately upon receiving a new scorecard from a patient's doctor. The new scores are also posted for public view. SEER continually needs to update the procedural specification as the pandemic changes in scope and as doctors discover newly observed issues that need to be monitored and reported. Repurposed drugs. Repurposed drugs are ones that have been approved for treating certain diseases, but not the ones desired. There can be a gray area of when these are allowed and when they are not. There can be a gray area of legal liability for a doctor or hospital using them this way. There can be a gray area whether insurance covers their costs. A major responsibility of SEER would be to define a protocol formally allowing a controlled use of repurposed drugs within the protocol. An example of repurposing would be the Math Plus protocol developed by a group of doctors treating COVID-19 firsthand. It is discussed at this URL shown here. They found that their COVID-19 patients appeared to die from blood coagulation problems more than lung problems. They devised a treatment based on treating these problems and found that they had a very high rate of success for hospitalized patients who started treatment soon enough. Yet, very few people know of this treatment and use it. The new protocol could help in these ways. First, provide a common site where all drugs under investigation can be easily discovered and their effectiveness tracked. This would help people find out about them and decide whether or not to volunteer to use them. Second, to provide a legal safe haven for doctors and hospitals who might otherwise be reluctant to take the legal risk for a repurposed drug unless it is covered in the protocol. Third, to legally allow the full cost of treatments to be covered by insurance for both hospitals and doctors. This is another potential gray area to be resolved by the legal edicts of the protocol. Math Plus is not the only repurposed drug with potential. It is only representative. However, if the new policies presented here had been in place to already be allowing early on official testing and reporting of repurposed drugs, there is good possibility that the pandemic and its effects would not have been as severe as what we are now facing. The material presented here is a summary of more detailed information I have posted on a preprint server. You can download it free of charge at the URL shown here. Discussion of the new protocol starts on page 11 of version 5 of the article. Notice, this article initially started out as a deep scientific analysis of the reasons I believe this virus was man-made, using the specific technology which led to the 2018 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. This was written for the professional scientist, and the discussion is deep. As the evidence for it being man-made began to sink in, I was not concerned so much about who made it, but the fact that if man has done this once, he can do it again at will. It is now the beginning of July. China is talking about a new, extremely lethal pig virus they are fighting. They say it has known capability of infecting man and could result in a second pandemic. I do not know if there's any significance to this talk or not, but the very suggestion underscores how important it is to fix the problem we are discussing here. Are you prepared to fight two pandemics at once? Is our country? This completes our discussion of the new protocol. If you found this presentation useful, please give me a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more videos, please subscribe to my channel. The survival of our country depends on fixing the protocol problem as quickly as possible. We're not prepared to handle new pandemics at this time. We're actually still not prepared to handle this one. Please share this video with your friends. Please share it with your congressmen, your U.S. senators, and talk show hosts. Thank you for your time.